Welcome back to Digital Futures Education. In this video, I'm going to talk about how to crush CompTIA exam anxiety or any other type of test anxiety on your way to success. I'm going to give you some real-world strategies for mastering PBQ questions, any type of performance or problem-based questions. So let's dive into some key questions and ideas that I've developed from not only working with students who are looking to pass the exam, but also coaching and counseling them to success. So this video is going to be structured in terms of questions that I've received from students and that I've worked with students in answering to help them prepare for exams. My first topic is, what are students most afraid of with taking an exam, and how can we prepare them for taking an exam? What I notice with working with students is most of them just fear failure or just not performing well or getting a result that they didn't anticipate, and it just holds them back from taking the next step. I think students also fear answering question types that they might feel might sneak up on them, or types of questions that they haven't encountered in their test preparation. And what I suggest with this is that you do want to prepare with a wide variety of question types. Do your research around question types and make sure that you do prepare for performance-based questions as much as possible related to the topic. So it's important to know that if you're a student, that research shows that these high stakes tests do produce anxiety. So it's completely normal to feel this way prior to preparing for or taking an exam. So a few tips to help you, reduce your anxiety is, first of all, just clarify the exam structure and understand what's the format of the exam, how many questions there are, and what types of questions are on the exam. Now, for the CompTIA exam, it's going to be two separate parts that you can take separately with a grouping of performance-based questions in each exam. So make sure as you begin to prepare for your exam that you have a number of ways to prepare with low stakes. So for example, have practice exams available to you that you utilize to measure your growth in different exams. Like for example, with CompTIA, there's two exams. There's the Core 1 and the Core 2. Make sure that you're practicing each separately and understand how they're different. Break down the structure of the exam so that you can isolate questions that you feel may give you a hard time, and just become comfortable with the structure of any exam that you plan on preparing for. How many questions, the length of the exam, topics covered, and find out and do your research into where you feel like your strengths and weaknesses might be within that structure. When I'm working with students to help them prepare, I do like to get them into these low stakes opportunities ahead of an exam. So doing sets of 10, 20, 30 questions, helping them learn how to break down the questions and understand the format of the troubleshooting methodology within a question, basically helping them prepare how to take a test. So that's a really important component of exam preparation, is learning how to prepare yourself just for the process of taking a test and what's going to be expected from you. And you need to remember that taking a test is not a full measure of your knowledge. Anxiety can sometimes, get in the way of you being able to perform your best because you start to lock out or freeze up. You need to remember that an exam is an opportunity to show what you know about very specific topics, and that you're not going to be potentially asked every single question, but it's a chance for you to break down questions, learn how to best answer them, and provide the best answer. And always be sure that that's what you're focused on, providing the best answer for the questions that you are given. And what is the best answer? Now, that's what you have to look at. In terms of the CompTIA exam, you need to remember that there are only usually 2 to 6 PBQs on any exam. So in the preparation for those, you need to, yes, have a broad view of which PBQs may be included on the exam, but remember, you need to lock it down and focus in terms of the preparation. The number of PBQs per exam is not as great as the other parts of the exam, the other 90 question sections of the exam. So you need to balance your study to balance both the content knowledge in those other questions and performance-based questions, and keep them in perspective. So as you prepare for an exam, scaffold your practice to go from maybe sitting down and doing 10 or 20 questions and really performing well before maybe you add 30 or 40 questions. By doing this, you can really examine how well you're performing on those lower number of questions before you try to take on a larger amount and maybe potentially feel overwhelmed with the number of questions you get right or wrong. And you're able to evaluate your learning and look much more closely at why you're getting a question right or wrong. So just make sure you scaffold how you prepare yourself for the assessments so that you don't overwhelm yourself with the results. So the next question I want to address is, how can you be more confident with questions which ask you for performance-based PBQ style questions, performance-based questions, which are going to test your knowledge in a longer format. On many exams, including CompTIA, performance-based questions are in a simulated environment. So instead of just selecting one answer, you may have to select multiple answers within a simulated environment in order to move to the next step or to be assessed within the question. So it's important that you can break down performance-based questions into the essential steps so that you can make the right decisions and understand the environment. But there is the benefit of understanding that on a majority of exams taken online, that they are built within simulations. So there are chances to potentially practice specific PBQs within certain types of software, or at least be able to break down the steps and understand what they might be before you take a PBQ question. So what I would encourage you to do is break down a scenario into steps, understand why the steps exist, and why they help solve the multiple steps within a performance-based question. You could even go as far as writing them out as practice on a notebook or a piece of paper, practicing each performance-based question, thinking out the process of solving it outside of a simulation environment so that when you're within the simulation environment, you can realistically break the question down. In order to help you do this, you want to consult CompTIA resources to help you see what are the parts of specific performance-based questions and what you need to understand in order to answer them effectively. Always be sure to review objectives of the exam so that you understand what the questions are really asking for you to show your knowledge in. And definitely do practice questions. Just as with understanding the format for an exam, always check to see if performance-based questions or questions which are simulations enable you to have partial credit for understanding the components of a longer form answer. Understanding this can help you reduce some of the anxiety of memorizing each step, but giving you the power to understand the concepts, which is going to give you a better overall score. How can you overcome perfectionism before taking an exam? That's an important question because I think a lot of students get very frustrated because they think they need to be perfect prior to taking an exam. So here I want to share some of my own experiences with thinking I need to be perfect prior to an exam and how I overcame it. Now, essentially, you do want to practice taking a test, taking an exam, practice the environment, practice the question types. And as you start to do this, a lot of that anxiety might build, it might begin to overwhelm you at times, but it's going to be important that you understand that you're just trying to break down the concepts so you can understand them effectively and learn how to be a better test taker. So for example, I would explain my own experience taking teacher tests. And I think when taking teacher tests or other longer form exams, the thing that helped me the most was understanding, and this applies directly to CompTIA as well, understanding that I'm learning how to take the test. I'm learning how to break questions down, understanding what they're really asking for. And at the end of the day, I'm looking to give them the best answer according to the test objective. I may have more information I want to give. I may have, a lot of information in the back of my mind that I think is important. But at the end of the day, you want to read the question extremely carefully and provide only what you think is the very best example. By doing this, it keeps you focused. You can even outline those types of questions more specifically, and it can help you feel confident with identifying the right answer. And it can start to give you a process for reviewing questions and also understanding what the best answer might be for each question. Now, as you review questions, I think you're going to find that you're going to begin to recognize the objectives of the exam even more specifically and in more detail as you work more specifically, as you start to break down each question, looking for what they're really asking for. And it's going to help you understand the concept in a lot more detail. The other thing I would recommend at this stage where you're beginning to focus on completing questions is in evaluating the questions is you want to also focus on completing one module at a time and assessing yourself on that module as completely and accurately as you can so that you can understand out of that module what you're really understanding the best and breaking it down so that when you go back to this module and look to improve this module, maybe after doing 2 or 3 modules, you've already isolated some of your strengths and weaknesses. So when you complete a module or an area of any test that you're preparing for, lesson 1, lesson 2, lesson 3, when you look at a specific lesson, be sure that you do an assessment of what you know and don't know prior to moving on. And yes, it's important to look and try to improve yourself as you're doing that module, but you have to overcome some perfectionists there so you don't stall your progression, but also at the same time take careful notes on understanding what you need to go back and study. And this is so rather than obsessing over accuracy, make sure you also focus on completing an entire module and all the components of a module so you know all of the components that are included in that module. And at this point, you also want to be setting some micro goals, setting some small, actionable goals within each lesson that helps you feel like you've accomplished quite a bit of your learning before you move on to another lesson. Some micro goals might include complete lesson 1, all of the core questions, the performance-based questions, do an assessment, and get 80% for that lesson prior to moving on to the next lesson. And doing this for each lesson as you progress forward. Setting those goals is going to definitely be dependent on your time that you're able to study for the exam, but it's definitely going to be valuable because as you approach each lesson or area of study for each certification or section of the certification, you're going to have a strong understanding of how well you performed in each section. You're going to also know that when you go back to prepare and study all sections over again, what you might need to focus on. The micro goals are also going to make you feel more confident with your learning of the content. It's going to help you feel more self-efficacy and also more confident as you go from lesson to lesson. The next question I want to address is to how to best reduce test anxiety with small, consistent habits. The fact is, test anxiety affects 20 to 40% of students, no matter what. And I think that number is even higher. And test anxiety impairs a student's ability to learn. So you need to find ways to help you reduce your test anxiety. And it's important to have some coping strategies for yourself. And if you're an educator, provide students with coping strategies. I think everybody does need a number of coping strategies or just general strategies to help them reduce anxiety before they do an exam or a certification, which is going to induce that anxiety. One of the things that I do as for a CompTIA exam or any other type of exam is I have them by providing succinct time limits for a number of questions. I push students to learn how to effectively determine the amount of time they need per question, how to continue moving past questions when that's necessary, how to learn how to go back to questions when they need to, and also learn how to manage their time within an exam. And by learning how to manage your time within an exam, you become more comfortable with what's available for your performance within an exam, time spent per question, and you can also review how well you do under specific time limits. And you can set a reasonable time in the beginning and slowly reduce your time and improve your performance per question, knowing that you need to speed up a little bit, learn how to break questions down a little bit better. But at the end of the day, you're thinking about how can I improve within this specific time period? And all of that practice of reducing anxiety within time periods is going to pay off big time when you're actually in the testing environment and practicing. I mean, When you're actually in the testing environment with a specific time limit, good idea of how much time you're going to be able to spend per question, how much time you're going to be able to focus, and how much time you might need to go back to certain types of questions. So it's going to give you an idea of the framework of the exam and also how much time you really have and get used to working within those time limits. I also like to have students work within a simulated testing environment. Basically, work under the conditions of trying to do your best, work under the conditions of trying to do your best within the specific time frame, and begin to practice that environment of the timing, the amount of time per question, and ultimately the ability to evaluate your success within that time frame and how will you improve your performance as you move forward with the questions that you got wrong. I also think it's important to have strategies for meditation exercises, breathing exercises, and just exercises that allow you to relax, take a few moments for yourself, like taking 5 minutes to just maybe close your eyes, relax, do some focused breathing work, just to help you take your mind away from the moment, the anxiety of the moment, and perform better when you come out and can refocus. Don't allow the anxiety to continue to build to a point where you can't perform effectively. And remember, always be practicing some formative assessment questions that are part of exams that allow you to best understand the bigger picture of the exam, and have completing short quizzes about sections of lesson build your confidence towards understanding an entire lesson. Potentially doing 5 questions related to just the parts of the computer can be much more effective than trying to do all 30 to 60 questions as part of a lesson. And it can help reiterate the knowledge that you need around the parts of the computer and check for knowledge. And those are items that you can truly build upon as you move forward. Working with formative question types like that, where you're just measuring a section of knowledge of an exam, can help reduce your anxiety up to 25 to 45% on any exam. Thank you for walking through these test-taking strategies for CompTIA or other IT or any other type of exam scenario. I appreciate your time checking out the video. I appreciate the questions my students have provided me, and then I always try to give my best effort in providing them opportunities to improve on their performance within exams and do their best. So feel free to connect with me, Daniel. Feel free to connect with me at support you in your goals.